Hello and welcome back to our channel. In the grand theater of wealth and power, there are names that resonate like a soft echo from a bygone era. They are the names of old money, fortunes forged in the Gilded Age, built from the raw materials of a new world. Think of the Carnegies, whose empire rose from the fiery blast furnaces of Pittsburgh, turning iron ore into the steel skeleton of modern America. Their legacy is tangible, found in the quiet halls of the libraries they endowed, monuments to knowledge built with the profits of industry. Think of the Rockefellers, a name synonymous with oil, the black blood of the earth that fueled the engines of the 20th century. Their power was absolute, a trust that controlled the flow of energy itself. But their legacy was eventually transmuted into vast philanthropic foundations. Their name etched onto university halls and medical research centers, a dynasty that settled into a kind of quiet, institutional nobility. These are the empires of the physical world, fortunes built on railroads that stitched a continent together, on factories that churned out the goods of progress, on land and resources that could be measured, weighed, and owned. Their power, while immense, was ultimately contained by the physical limits of their assets. Their estates, however grand, had fences. Their railroads, however long, had a final destination. But then there are other names, names that don't whisper from the past, but roar in the present. Names that don't belong to the quiet of the museum wing, but to the chaotic, crackling energy of the 24-hour news cycle. These are names that don't just build things, but build thoughts. They don't just shape steel, they shape minds. They forge not girders, but narratives. They control not the flow of oil, but the flow of opinion. They are the architects of the intangible, the proprietors of perception. And in our modern age, there is one name that has come to tower above all others in this new pantheon of power, a name that, for better or for worse, has become synonymous with the very idea of influence itself. That name is Murdoch. To even begin to comprehend the story of this family is to understand that you are not embarking on a traditional business biography. This isn't a story about a family that simply owns businesses. This is the story of a dynasty that owns the conversation. It is the chronicle of a modern empire built not on the solid foundations of steel or land, but on something far more potent, more volatile, and infinitely more pervasive: information. Information, in its rawest form, is the currency of our age. It is the light that illuminates our world and the shadows that obscure it. It is the basis of our decisions, the foundation of our beliefs, the very lens through which we perceive reality. And the Murdoch dynasty, for over half a century, has made it its business to grind that lens, to control the light, and to command the shadows. Theirs is an empire of the ether, its assets beamed from satellites, carried on airwaves, and printed in ink that dries on the page but stains the consciousness of millions. And like any great empire in history, its story is not one of gentle acquisition and quiet stewardship. It is a saga of ruthless ambition, of shocking scandals that threaten to shatter its foundations, and of a bitter, brutal war of succession, a conflict of Shakespearean proportions that pits father against son and brother against brother for the ultimate prize, control of the world's most powerful throne of information. To understand the Murdochs, you can't just look at a balance sheet. You have to look at the history of royal courts. Take the House of Valois, who ruled France during the violent turmoil of the 16th century. Through figures like the cunning Catherine de' Medici, they wielded absolute monarchical power, playing factions against each other, orchestrating royal marriages as political tools, and using both charm and poison to maintain their grip on the throne. The Murdoch family's ability to influence modern conservative politics, to anoint prime ministers and presidents, is a direct echo of that kind of kingly power. But their secrets, their hidden skeletons, for that, you must look at the ambitious House of Guise from that same period in France. As ultra-Catholic leaders, they masterfully manipulated public piety and fear, using propaganda and conspiracy to tear the nation apart in the wars of religion, all in a relentless pursuit of the French crown itself. Their ambition directly parallels the way Murdoch's media outlets have been accused of weaponizing division for political gain, and the moral compromises, those echo a more recent dynasty, the Sackler family. Through their company, Purdue Pharma, the Sacklers built a fortune by aggressively and deceptively marketing the highly addictive opioid OxyContin, all while denying the devastating crisis they were fueling. They used their immense profits to engage in philanthropy, washing their name on the walls of the world's most prestigious museums, a modern attempt to buy legitimacy and cover the human cost of their empire. We're going to pull back the curtain on this family. We'll trace their journey from a single Australian newspaper to a global behemoth. We'll dive deep into the scandals that threatened to bring it all crashing down. We'll examine the alliances and betrayals that defined a generation of political life in Britain, Australia, and the United States. And most importantly, we'll explore the Game of Thrones being played out right now for control of it all. This is the story of the Murdoch family, the secrets, the controversies, and the battle for the most powerful media throne on earth. Our story begins not in the gleaming towers of New York or the halls of power in London, but in a much quieter place, Adelaide, Australia. But to understand the son, Rupert, you first need to understand the father. Sir Keith Murdoch was not some small-time newspaper executive. He was Australian journalistic royalty. A formidable figure in his own right, his legend was forged in the crucible of the First World War. As a young journalist, he was sent to report on the Gallipoli campaign, a disastrous invasion of Turkey orchestrated by the British High Command. He was horrified by what he saw, the incompetence, the disease, the pointless slaughter of Australian and New Zealand troops. Defying military censors, he penned a scathing 8,000-word letter that exposed the catastrophe. A friend, the then Australian Prime Minister, made sure it got into the right hands in London. The letter caused a political firestorm, helped lead to the firing of the British commanding general, Sir Ian Hamilton, and played a crucial role in the eventual evacuation of the Allied forces. In Australia, Keith Murdoch became a national hero, the man who spoke truth to empire and helped forge a new, independent sense of Australian identity. After the war, he built a powerful newspaper group, but his style was that of the establishment. He was a patrician, a confidant of prime ministers, a man who saw his papers as instruments of national betterment, reflecting a respectable center-right view of the world. He was, in short, everything his son would later rebel against. In 1952, Sir Keith died suddenly of a heart attack. The family was hit with massive death duties, a tax on their inheritance that forced his widow, Dame Elizabeth, to sell off the most prized assets in the portfolio, including the prestigious Melbourne Herald. All that was left for his 21-year-old son, fresh from Oxford University, was what was considered the afterthought. A small, struggling Adelaide paper, The News. This young man, Keith Rupert Murdoch, was an enigma. He had been sent to England for a proper education at Oxford's Worcester College. There, he had embraced the rebellious left-wing politics of the post-war era. He became known as Red Rupert, joined the Labour Party club, and famously kept a bust of Lenin in his rooms. He was a fiery participant in the Oxford Union, the legendary debating society that served as a training ground for future prime ministers, honing his skills of argument and persuasion. Before returning to Australia, he took an apprenticeship at London's Daily Express, working as a sub-editor under the tutelage of another legendary press baron, Lord Beaverbrook, a man who, like Murdoch would, understood that newspapers were instruments of power. Now, armed with a degree in a single second-rate newspaper, he returned to Australia not with a silver spoon in his mouth, but with a chip on his shoulder. He wasn't just inheriting a legacy, he was inheriting a challenge. No one could have predicted what he would turn it into. Rupert Murdoch was different. He had no interest in his father's brand of respectable nation-building journalism. He saw it as stuffy, elitist, and boring. He wanted to build an empire, and he had a playbook. He looked at the media titans of the past, men like William Randolph Hearst, the original press baron, who used his newspapers to whip up public sentiment and even push America into the Spanish-American War. Rupert took that model and supercharged it for the 20th and 21st centuries. His formula was simple: give the public what they want, crime, sex, and scandal, and use the power and profits from that populism to pursue a political agenda. His first move was to dive headfirst into the brutal newspaper wars of Australia. He turned the news in Adelaide into a sensation-driven machine, personally writing lurid headlines and pushing his editors to be more aggressive. His big break came with the case of Max Stewart, an Indigenous man sentenced to death for murder. Murdoch's paper launched a ferocious campaign questioning the conviction, turning it into a national cause célèbre that boosted circulation dramatically and showed him the power of a crusading newspaper. He soon expanded, buying papers in other cities and waging relentless circulation battles against the established media giant Fairfax Media, which he saw as the embodiment of the complacent establishment his father had belonged to. In one famous incident in Sydney, he launched a new Sunday paper, the Sunday Mirror, and engaged in a no-holds-barred war with the rival Sunday Telegraph, slashing prices and using stunts to poach readers. It was a costly battle, but it showed his willingness to bleed money to destroy a competitor. In 1964, he took his biggest gamble yet, launching Australia's first national newspaper, The Australian. It was a prestige project, a high-minded broadsheet intended to rival the great papers of the world. It was also a massive money pit for years, but it signaled his grand ambition. He wasn't content to be a regional player. He wanted to dominate the national conversation and influence the powerful in the capital, Canberra. His power in his home country became so immense that he could make or break political careers on a whim. In 1972, his papers enthusiastically backed the charismatic Labour Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, helping him win a landmark victory. But just 3 years later, during a constitutional crisis in 1975, Murdoch turned on Whitlam with ferocious venom. His papers ran a relentless campaign against the government, helping to poison the political atmosphere and ultimately contributing to Whitlam's dismissal by the Governor-General. It was a stunning demonstration of his power. The man he had helped make, he now helped break. Having cut his teeth in the Australian market, he turned his sights to the old world, the place where his father had made his name, Britain. His first major move was in 1968 when he bought the salacious Sunday tabloid, The News of the World, a paper famous for its Vickers and tarts exposés. The very next year, in a deal that outmaneuvered rival press baron Robert Maxwell, he bought the Sun. At the time, it was a failing left-leaning broadsheet. Murdoch transformed it into a bombastic populist tabloid. The masterstroke was the introduction of the Page 3 girl, a topless model featured daily. It was hugely controversial, but a commercial masterclass. It shattered circulation records, defined the paper's brand, and created a fiercely loyal readership of working-class men. With that audience captured, he turned the paper into a political weapon. The Sun became famous for its sensational headlines and its powerful political endorsements. His most crucial alliance was with Margaret Thatcher. Throughout the 1980s, his papers provided ferocious, unwavering support for her conservative government. When Britain went to war with Argentina over the Falkland Islands in 1982, the Sun's jingoistic coverage was legendary, encapsulated by its infamous headline after the sinking of the Argentine cruiser, the General Belgrano, "Gotcha." It celebrated the deaths of hundreds of sailors, a move that horrified many but perfectly captured the paper's aggressive, populist tone. His papers relentlessly attacked her opponents, particularly labor leader Michael Foot, portraying him as an unelectable, doddering old fool. In return for this support, Thatcher's government passed media deregulation laws that directly benefited Murdoch's business ambitions, paving the way for his hugely profitable move into satellite television with Sky. It was a perfect symbiotic relationship between media and political power. But to secure his British Empire, he had to break the power of the old guard. For decades, the newspaper industry had been held hostage by the powerful and notoriously inefficient print unions on Fleet Street. In 1986, in a meticulously planned and highly secret operation, he shifted his entire printing operation overnight from Fleet Street to a new high-tech, heavily fortified plant in the London Docklands district of Wapping. When the unions went on strike, he fired all 6,000 of them. The Wapping dispute, as it came to be known, was a brutal year-long battle, marked by violent clashes between thousands of picketing printers and a massive police presence. Murdoch won. He was hailed by some as a modernizing hero who saved the British newspaper industry, and reviled by others as a ruthless union buster who destroyed livelihoods. What was undeniable was that he had single-handedly changed the face of British industry and secured a low-cost base to fund his global expansion. The battle over Wapping wasn't just about business. It was an ideological war, and it perfectly illustrated Murdoch's take-no-prisoners approach to achieving his goals. But becoming a kingmaker in Britain wasn't a new invention. It was simply the export of a model he had already perfected on his home turf, a political laboratory where his power was at its most raw and absolute, Australia. There, his influence runs so deep it has shaped elections for decades. The most blatant example was in 2013 when his News Corp outlets launched an all-out media assault to back challenger Tony Abbott, effectively acting as his campaign's Air Force. But the public campaigns are only half the story. The real power is wielded in secret, through private off-the-record meetings with prime ministers and political hopefuls, allowing him to shape policy without accountability. This kind of covert power play is a timeless strategy. In the corporate world, it mirrors the alleged espionage at Sumner Redstone's Viacom, used to crush rivals. In the political realm, it's a modern echo of King Francis I of France, making a secret treaty with the Ottoman Sultan, or Byzantine emperors of the Palaiologos dynasty, paying bribes to Timur's court to secure their throne. It is the art of the backroom deal. Then, in 1976, with this king-making playbook tested and proven in both the UK and Australia, he crossed the Atlantic and bought the New York Post. He arrived in a city on the brink of bankruptcy, a place of grit, grime, and anxiety. The Post became its perfect reflection. He applied the same formula he'd used on the Sun, turning the paper into a loud, brawling, must-read tabloid with screaming headlines that became legendary, from headless body and topless bar to Ford to City, drop dead. It gave a voice to a certain kind of working-class New Yorker and drove the city's conversation with a mix of crime, celebrity, and bare-knuckle conservative politics. He had his beachhead, but a New York paper, however loud, wasn't the endgame. His American ambitions were far grander. In 1985, he made a stunning move, buying the legendary 20th Century Fox film studio from oilman Marvin Davis for over $500 million. Hollywood was shocked. A tabloid newspaper baron was now a major studio head. They saw him as a barbarian at the gates. But Murdoch wasn't interested in making movies. He was interested in the studio's television assets. To legally own those assets, American television stations, he had to be an American citizen. So, in a purely pragmatic move that showed his ultimate ambition, he renounced his Australian citizenship and became an American. He used the stations he acquired to launch a fourth broadcast network, the Fox Broadcasting Company, a daring attempt to challenge the iron grip of the big three, ABC, CBS, and NBC. For decades, those networks had projected an air of authoritative centrist consensus. The Fox network, run by the brilliant executive Barry Diller, set out to be the disruptive outsider. Its early hits, like the working-class sitcom Married, with Children, and the animated satire The Simpsons, were edgy, irreverent, and thumbed their noses at the safer, more wholesome programming of their rivals. But the network's watershed moment came in 1993. In a move that stunned the industry, Fox outbid the venerable CBS for the rights to broadcast NFL football. It was an audacious gamble, costing hundreds of millions of dollars. But it instantly put the upstart network on the map and gave it credibility. Murdoch had sensed something powerful bubbling under the surface of American life, a vast underserved audience of conservative Americans who felt that the mainstream media talked down to them, ignored their values, and dismissed their worldview. He didn't just see a market gap, he saw a cultural rebellion waiting for a leader. The masterstroke, the move that would cement his legacy and change the face of American politics forever, came in 1996. He launched Fox News. To bring his vision to life, he hired a brilliant and ruthless political operative named Roger Ailes. Ailes was a legend in Republican politics. He had been a media advisor to Richard Nixon, famous for his orchestra pit theory of politics. If you have two guys on a stage and one guy says, "I have a solution to the Middle East problem," and the other guy falls in the orchestra pit, who do you think is going to be on the evening news? He had produced the attack ads that helped elect Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Ailes wasn't a journalist. He was a political warrior who understood television better than anyone. Murdoch gave him $1 billion and a simple mandate: build a conservative news network from the ground up. Fox News launched in the middle of the Bill Clinton presidency, and it immediately went on the attack, providing 24/7 coverage of the Whitewater and Monica Lewinsky scandals, pioneering a style of partisan combat that was unheard of on cable news. With its original stars, the pugnacious Bill O'Reilly and the staunchly conservative Sean Hannity, the network created a bunker-like mentality, a safe space for viewers who believed they were besieged by a hostile liberal culture. The September 11th attacks and the subsequent war on terror supercharged its influence. The network's patriotic, pro-war stance resonated with a huge audience and solidified its position as the voice of conservative America during the George W. Bush years. It wasn't just another cable news channel. It was a cultural and political force. Its slogan was a work of marketing genius, fair and balanced. It positioned the channel as the noble alternative to a biased establishment, all while pursuing a fiercely partisan agenda. In practice, its influence became so profound that it essentially became a media wing of the Republican Party. The channel's sway over its audience, and by extension, over political discourse, was a modern form of the kind of cultural patronage wielded by old money families, like the Whitneys, who used their wealth to shape art and culture to their liking. Rupert Murdoch was shaping something far more volatile, political reality itself. As the empire grew, so did the family's status. They began the slow, deliberate transition from new money to the rarefied air of old money. A key part of this transformation was strategic marriages. Rupert's unions weren't just personal, they were alliances. His 32-year marriage to Anna Torv, a journalist and novelist, solidified his place in the establishment and produced his three main heirs, Elizabeth, Lachlan, and James. Their eventual divorce in 1999 came with one of the largest settlements in history at the time, a reported $1.7 billion, and was a key catalyst for formally structuring how the family's wealth would be controlled. His later marriage to Wendy Deng, a Chinese-born businesswoman and Yale graduate, connected him to the emerging global elite, much like how Aristotle Onassis used his marriages to the daughter of a shipping magnate and then to a former First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, to cement his status as a global player. Every move was calculated. Today, the scale of this empire is staggering. It's split into two main public companies, News Corp and Fox Corporation. As of recent valuations, News Corp has a market cap of around $16.5 billion, and Fox Corporation is valued at around $24.7 billion. Together, that's over a $41 billion empire. And Rupert Murdoch himself? In 2023, Forbes estimated his personal and family fortune at a massive $17.4 billion. What does this empire actually control? The list of crown jewels is a who's who of global media. Under the Fox Corporation umbrella, you have the behemoth, Fox News. You also have the Fox Broadcast Network, Fox Sports, and other television assets. Under News Corp, you have some of the most prestigious and powerful newspapers in the world. The crown jewel here is the Wall Street Journal. Murdoch's 2007 acquisition of its parent company, Dow Jones, was a titanic battle. He faced down resistance from the Bancroft family, who had controlled the paper for a century and feared he would tarnish its prestigious brand, ultimately winning them over with a massive $5 billion offer. He also owns the brash New York Post, the Times, and the Sun in the UK, and a vast network of papers in Australia. And that's before you even get to the publishing giant HarperCollins, which has published everyone from Mark Twain to Agatha Christie. Their assets aren't just media companies. They have vast real estate holdings, from sprawling estates in Rupert's native Australia to prime properties in Manhattan and Los Angeles. They've had significant investments in other ventures too, like Foxtel in Australia, a pay TV giant they recently sold a stake in a deal worth around $2.1 billion. But this is where the Murdoch story takes a critical turn. How do you ensure an empire this vast, this influential, doesn't just dissipate after the founder is gone? History is littered with cautionary tales. Look at the Vanderbilts, Cornelius Commodore. Vanderbilt built a colossal fortune in shipping and railroads, but within a few generations, the family's lavish spending and lack of a central financial strategy led to its decline. The grand estates were sold, the fortune squandered. The Murdochs were determined not to let that happen. Their solution was inspired by the financial genius of families like the Rockefellers and the Mellons, who were masters of wealth preservation. In 1999, following his costly divorce from Anna, the Murdochs established the Murdoch Family Trust. This is the absolute key to understanding their power. The trust was established in Nevada, known for its favorable trust laws that allow for dynastic structures to exist in perpetuity. It holds the family's stake in the companies. Critically, it holds nearly 40% of the voting shares in both News Corp and Fox Corporation. This structure does two things. First, it keeps the fortune consolidated. Second, and more importantly, it ensures that voting control remains firmly within the hands of the family. It's a financial fortress designed to guarantee longevity, a structure more akin to the centuries-long stewardship of the Grosvenor family's London property empire than the fleeting wealth of the Goulds. But a fortress is only as strong as the person who holds the keys, and even the most brilliant designs cannot contain the raw human desire for absolute control. Before we can even look at the fine print of the trust, we have to acknowledge the attempts to secretly rewrite it. In 2023, a plot was set in motion, bearing the ironically peaceful codename Project Family Harmony. Its goal was a legal coup for Rupert Murdoch to amend the trust, bypass his other children, and grant sole, unchallengeable control to his chosen son Lachlan. This was a move straight from the playbook of kings, not businessmen. It echoed the ruthless trust manipulations of media titan Sumner Redstone, and even the dynastic cover-ups of older royal houses, like the Trastamara of Spain declaring Queen Joanna mad to usurp her power, or the House of Lorraine exiling Duke Charles IV to seize his lands. This modern plot, however, was dragged into a Nevada courtroom where in 2024 it was ruled an act of bad faith. The coup failed, but it proved that even this financial fortress was not immune to a power grab from within. It begged the question, what is the fundamental weakness in its design that made such a plot even conceivable? But here's the catch. The trust is controlled by a set of votes. Rupert initially had 4 votes. His 4 eldest children from his first 2 marriages, Prudence, Elizabeth, Lachlan, and James, each had 1. As long as Rupert was alive, his 4 votes gave him ultimate control. The children he had with Wendy Dong, Grace, and Chloe were made beneficiaries, receiving a financial stake, but in a hugely contentious decision that caused immense family friction. They were granted no voting rights, ensuring power remained with the older generation. But the question that has haunted the family for decades is, what happens when Rupert is gone? That question has fueled a dynastic struggle of Shakespearean proportions. And while the trust might have secured their financial future, it couldn't protect them from the scandals that would stain their name and threaten to tear the empire apart from the inside. The first great crisis would explode out of his British newspaper operations. It was called phone hacking. For years, Rupert Murdoch's British tabloids, particularly the News of the World, were untouchable. They were feared by politicians, celebrities, and even the royal family for their ability to unearth private information. For a long time, people just assumed they had incredible sources. The truth was far darker. They weren't just getting sources, they were illegally hacking into the voicemails of thousands of people. The first whispers emerged in the mid-2000s, but the company dismissed them as the work of a single rogue reporter. It was a cover-up, a lie. The reality was that this was a widespread, systematic practice. Private investigators on the newspaper's payroll were given the names of targets, movie stars, politicians, sports figures, even victims of crime, and they would hack their phones, listening to their most private messages, all in the pursuit of a salacious headline. And then, in 2011, the scandal reached its horrifying apex. It was revealed that the News of the World had hacked the phone of a 13-year-old missing schoolgirl named Millie Dowler. What's worse, when her voicemail box became full, Investigators working for the paper deleted messages to make room for new ones. This gave her frantic parents and the police false hope that she was still alive and accessing her phone. In reality, she had already been murdered. The public revulsion was instantaneous and overwhelming. This wasn't about celebrities or politicians anymore. This was a violation of a murdered child's privacy and a cruel deception of her grieving family. The scandal exploded at the worst possible moment for Murdoch. He was on the cusp of his biggest corporate prize, a multi-billion-dollar deal to take full ownership of the highly profitable satellite broadcaster BSKI-B. The phone hacking revelations turned public opinion virulently against him, and the deal collapsed under the weight of the scandal, costing him billions and representing the first true check on his power in decades. The fallout was catastrophic. Rupert Murdoch was forced to shut down the 168-year-old news of the world. Top executives, once his trusted lieutenants, were arrested. Figures like Rebecca Brooks, the fiery CEO of his British newspaper arm, and Andy Coulson, a former editor who had gone on to become Prime Minister David Cameron's communications director, were engulfed in the crisis, showcasing the toxic proximity between Murdoch's press and the heart of government. Rupert and his son James were hauled before a British parliamentary committee to answer for what happened. It was during this hearing that one of the most iconic images of the modern Murdoch saga occurred. As a protester tried to throw a pie at the elder Murdoch, his then-wife Wendy Deng leaped from her seat and struck the attacker, fiercely defending her husband. It was a moment of high drama, a wife protecting the patriarch of the dynasty. But the damage was done. The phone hacking scandal exposed the dark underbelly of the Murdoch method. The subsequent Leveson inquiry, a massive public judicial review, laid bare the rot within the industry. Celebrities like Hugh Grant became passionate activists, giving powerful testimony about the personal cost of the tabloid's intrusion. It wasn't just a business problem. It was a moral crisis that struck at the heart of the family and their empire. And it was followed by another. Years later, back in the U.S., the very culture of Fox News, Murdoch's greatest moneymaker, would face its own reckoning. In 2016, the architect of Fox News, Roger Ailes, was forced to resign in disgrace amid a torrent of sexual harassment allegations, initiated by anchor Gretchen Carlson. The scandal exposed a toxic, misogynistic culture that had festered at the network for years. It was another stain on the empire's reputation, another crisis born from a win-at-all-costs mentality. This brings us to the core drama of the Murdoch dynasty, the real-life Game of Thrones, the battle for succession. To understand this, you need to understand the players. First, there is the king, Rupert Murdoch, a brilliant, ruthless, visionary patriarch who built the empire from a single newspaper. He is a man who thrives on conflict, on news, on power. For decades, he dangled the crown in front of his children, fostering rivalry, testing their loyalty, and ultimately forcing them to compete for his approval. There are 4 children with votes on the all-important family trust. The eldest is Prudence from his first marriage. She has largely stayed out of the family business and the public eye, living a more private life in Australia, often seen as the one child who managed to escape the gravitational pull of the succession battle. Then come the 3 children from his second marriage to Anna Torv, Elizabeth, Lachlan, and James. For years, these 3 were seen as the main contenders. Elizabeth is a highly capable media executive in her own right. But her success was forged outside the family empire, born from a secret rift. In 2000, she quietly exited News Corp after feeling she was being sidelined by her father, who clearly favored Lachlan as his successor. To maintain an illusion of family unity, her departure was framed as a personal choice. In reality, it was the first major casualty of the Succession War. Pushed out, she went on to found her own wildly successful television production company, Shine. In a classic Murdochian move that blurred family and business lines, News Corp later bought Shine for hundreds of millions of dollars, a deal seen by many as Rupert, using corporate funds to enrich his daughter and lure her back into the fold. But Elizabeth remains a complex figure, smart, ambitious, and at times a vocal critic of the culture of her father's companies, particularly during the phone hacking scandal. She represents a more modern, perhaps more ethically minded vision of media. Then there are the two sons, Lachlan and James, and their rivalry is the stuff of legend. It's a Cain and Abel story for the corporate age. Lachlan, the elder son, is the prodigal son returned. In his youth, he was seen as the heir apparent, rising quickly through the company to become deputy chief operating officer. But in 2005, he abruptly quit after clashing with his father and other powerful executives, most notably Fox News chief Roger Ailes, whose influence he resented. He went off to Australia to run his own ventures, forging his own identity away from the New York headquarters. For a time, it seemed he was out of the running forever, but then he returned. Lachlan is, in many ways, his father's son. He shares Rupert's conservative political ideology and his bare-knuckle business instincts. He is the loyalist, the one who believes in the mission of the empire his father built. James, the younger son, is the rebel. For a long time, he was the modernizer, the corporate executive pushing the company into new digital ventures in Asia. He was seen as the most ruthless businessman of the three. But his time as the executive in charge in the UK when the phone hacking scandal blew up became his crucible. It tarnished his reputation and seemed to genuinely change him. He grew increasingly uncomfortable with the hard right, often polarizing, editorial direction of the family's news outlets, especially Fox News in the U.S. and their paper's coverage of issues like climate change in Australia. And then that discomfort curdled into horror as his worst fears were validated by a single catastrophic event. Following the 2020 election, Fox News, under the watch of Rupert and Lachlan, unleashed a fire hose of falsehoods, relentlessly promoting conspiracy theories that Dominion voting systems had rigged the election. This time, however, the target fought back. Dominion's massive defamation lawsuit was an existential threat, not just financially, but because a public trial promised to expose the network's cynical inner workings. The pre-trial discovery phase was devastating. Internal emails and texts were made public, revealing that Fox's biggest stars, and Rupert Murdoch himself, knew the election fraud claims were false. The court filings were a treasure trove of unguarded, damning conversations. On one side, you had Fox hosts publicly telling their millions of viewers that the election was stolen. On the other, you had their private messages showing they believed none of it. Star host Tucker Carlson texted his producer that a key source of the lies, attorney Sidney Powell, was, quote, a fucking bitch, and that he passionately hated Donald Trump. Host Laura Ingraham wrote that Powell was a complete nut. Sean Hannity testified under oath that he did not believe it for 1 second. And at the very top, Rupert Murdoch himself admitted under oath that he knew the claims were crazy and damaging, but he allowed them to be broadcast. Why? Because he was worried about losing viewers to even more extreme right-wing competitors like Newsmax. It was a purely commercial decision. In one email, Murdoch himself admitted it was terrible stuff damaging everybody, yet did nothing to stop it. Rather than face a public reckoning where their stars would have to testify to these facts under oath, the Murdochs chose to pay. On the very eve of the trial in 2023, they agreed to a secret, last-minute settlement for an almost incomprehensible $787.5 million. It was one of the largest media settlements in history, a stunning price tag to silence the truth about the lies they had broadcast. The ideological gulf between James and his father and brother grew into a chasm. While Lachlan embraced the empire, James began to publicly distance himself from it. The breaking point came in 2020. James Murdoch resigned from the board of News Corp, citing disagreements over certain editorial content published by the company's news outlets and certain other strategic decisions. It was an earthquake. A son of the founder, a man once seen as a future leader, was publicly disavowing the family business, effectively accusing it of being a force for ill. He took his inheritance and founded his own investment firm, Lupa Systems, dedicated to funding media and tech startups that aligned with his new, more progressive worldview. He and his wife became major donors to democratic causes, directly opposing the political machine his father had built. The family had split right down the middle, not just over business strategy, but over fundamental questions of morality, politics, and the role of media in society. With James out, the path was cleared. Lachlan Murdoch was solidified as the chosen one. He is now the executive chair and CEO of Fox Corporation and the executive chair of News Corp. He is the anointed successor, the one tasked with carrying the torch. The war, for now, seems to be over. Lachlan, the loyal son, has won the throne, but the questions linger. Can he hold this vast, controversial empire together without the force of nature that is his father? Rupert Murdoch, even in his 90s, casts an impossibly long shadow. His retirement from the chairman roles in 2023, handing the reins fully to Lachlan, marked the official end of an era. But the DNA of the company is still his. The Murdoch legacy is one of contradictions. It's a story of incredible business success and innovation. Rupert Murdoch saw the future of media time and time again, but it's also a story of power that many believe has been used to coarsen public discourse, deepen political divisions, and prioritize ideology over objective truth. It's a story of a family whose internal feuds and dramas have had real-world consequences for millions of people. Unlike the Vanderbilts, their fortune is not at risk of being squandered. The trust, that financial fortress, will ensure the Murdoch name remains a force for generations to come, much like the Mellon fortune has. But the soul of the empire is what's at stake. Will Lachlan continue his father's path, doubling down on the populist, conservative politics that have made them so powerful and so controversial? Or will the critiques from his brother James, his sister Elizabeth, and a changing world force and evolution? The empire faces headwinds from cord-cutting, declining newspaper readership, and a political landscape that is more fractured than ever. The old playbook may not work forever. The story of the Murdochs is more than just a family drama or a business case study. It's a story about the very nature of power in the modern world. It shows how control of information can be more potent than any army, how a family dynasty can shape the fate of nations, and how the battle for a father's approval and a corporate crown can create fault lines that run through our entire society. The king may have finally stepped back, but the game for the Murdoch throne is far from over, and its outcome will continue to shape our world for years to come. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.